Welcome to our first breakout session. This is the small teaching book discussion. Here's our roles that we can please pass around. My name is Jay Goodliff. I'm in the political science department. This is Joe Price in the economics department. We are on the college curriculum committee, and we are the facilitators of the discussion today, but we want to make sure that everyone feels welcome to participate and go in different directions. We are going to start out this discussion with a pop quiz, or in other words, an opening question. This is a retrieval exercise. If you have a piece of paper, that's great. If you don't, I can give you a piece of paper. The pop quiz is, what retrieval exercise are you currently doing in one of your classes? What retrieval exercise are you currently doing in one of your classes? This is from chapter 1. You could have here's some paper. Pass around. Anybody needs a piece of paper? You can do it on your computer, whatever you like. All right, has everybody had an opportunity to write down the retrieval exercise they currently use in one of their classes? Okay, so now we're going to follow up our retrieval exercise by reminding ourselves what are those retrieval exercises. Joe's going to write down what they are on the board. So what are the retrieval exercises that you can do in a class? Anybody can go up and say. You can talk about the one you're doing, whatever you want. Yes, please.
Pick the easy one.
Okay.
Quizzes, short quizzes.
Okay, short quizzes. Good. What's another one?
Open with a question.
Opening questions. Good.
About what you talked about last time or what the student read.
Good. Opening questions, short quizzes. What else?
I'm done. Everyone else.
I am fine with long, awkward silences, you should know.
I'll confess to not reading this chapter, but as a teacher for a long time, it's just opening the class by by raise of hands, how many of you have or something, so that you can get them back on your topic or assess how many of them actually did the
Okay,
homework
an
assignment,
assessment,
or
good.
just a physical.
All right, Wade?
Well, he likes this idea of going back to the last class.
Okay.
Somebody tell me what happened in the last class.
Okay, good. That might be an opening question, right, that we'd have. Any other ones that people remember from this chapter?
Didn't read the book yet, just got it a couple days ago.
Okay.
But thinking, just tying it into the last lecture, 2 lectures ago, lecture, so that they see that things aren't isolated but connected.
Good. Okay.
Connections, I guess.
Good. All right. Some other suggestions that were given, they come under the topics of opening questions, closing questions, what he calls online retrieval, and what we'd fit into online retrieval are, for instance, quizzes that you take before you come to class. Although you can see some of those, he wants short, frequent quizzes. And then the last one was it something syllabus retrieval? Is that the name of that? Retrieving syllabus, where you refer back to the syllabus or things that have happened before. What are we doing? All right. So those were the main ones that he brings up in this chapter. Now we're going to do a prediction exercise. This comes from chapter 2. So I want you only know what you've written down for yourself. You don't know what anybody else has written down unless you're peeking over their shoulder, which might happen in the class as well. What do you predict is the most frequently used retrieval exercise that people in this room are using right now? So what do you think was the most frequently thing written down by everyone in this class, in this discussion? Okay, so in order for us to assess how well we did on our prediction, now we need to know what everybody else did. So We'll go through this. How many people wrote down on their thing short quizzes? Count that up. Okay. How many people wrote down opening questions? Going back to the last class? 2. Tying it to the syllabus, past classes. Closing questions. And online retrieval, which could be like those quizzes and such. Okay, so now we get to see how many people were right. How many people put down short quizzes as the most frequent one? In terms of predicting, in terms of your prediction. Sorry, how many people put down short quizzes? Okay. So what is this exercise that we're trying, so let's talk about what we've just done and talk about why we're doing it and why it might work or not. So what is the purpose of a retrieval exercise? What does that help with? Yes?
Well, it's not just me talking to them, that doesn't count as a retrieval exercise. It has to be something that challenges the student to think about what they've just read or what they heard last time or something. That's why the short quizzes or the questions, I like to do, if they have a question, I like to make them write down their answer, like you've done to us, right? Even if it's not a graded quiz. So it's all about making the student retrieve, not just me talking at them.
Good. Why else is this effective? Yes?
As the teacher, I want to know what their understanding level is. Are they getting it? And I can look at a quiz and look at which questions they all missed, and then I know, oh, I must not have made that point very clear.
Good, good. What other reasons?
Well, it actually causes the brain to embed that knowledge deeper and more firm, so it's not forgotten. Then if you have to retrieve it shortly after even if it be a few days after you've studied it or learned it.
Good. And so that's one of the points he's trying to make throughout this book, right, is that the things, these exercises that he's suggesting for us are things which cognitive psychologists and learning scholars have found to be effective. And cognitively, it's helpful to have to retrieve things repeatedly.
And that there's often a distinction between long-run retrieval versus short-run. And so the students love short-run retrieval because they feel like they're learning, but they're not actually embedding in a long-run sense.
And why is a prediction exercise useful? Yes?
It captures their attention because it's live and it's spontaneous and it could be changing, so engage them in the current present time.
Good. Why else is that? So it raises curiosity, which is one of the things that he mentions later in the book is really helpful for getting students involved in learning. What else is?
Makes them think. I mean, you will retain and learn something better if you can tie it to something you already know, if you can tie it to prior knowledge. And so when they have to predict, they've got to go back to that prior knowledge, tie something to it, and then try to apply it to something that they may or may not be as well versed in. And so they've got to draw some conclusions. And I think that's what we want people to do, is be able to draw conclusions and not just be led like a led horse all the way through.
Right. And that's one of the things they point out is that he points out that the more you can tie things to an existing web of knowledge, the more likely it is to stick. Yes?
I think it creates I use open quizzes, and I think it creates a strong sense of anxiety. Which maybe probably BYU because there's too much anxiety. But it does create some anxiety, particularly when I say some of these quizzes will show up again on the midterm and the final exam, and so it just makes them focus and say, well, yeah, I better remember this. And so, I mean, anxiety is a strong
Motivator? Well, and one of the things I like about what you said that you do, is, which corresponds to what he says in the book, is that you say, well, here's this thing that we're doing right now. and it's going to correspond, which is low stakes, but it's going to correspond to something that you're going to do at the end of the semester, which is high stakes, right? Like the final exam or a midterm exam. But that they're actually practicing what they're doing for when they'll be assessed later. It won't be some new thing that you're dropping on them. Good.
One other thing on those clickers or using that response system, a faculty can use it to see how well am I explaining or giving you the principles. So you can, it's an assessment of yourself, of how clear am I teaching you this? Are you getting it?
Mm-hmm.
So you know where you stand with them, and you can do that as often as you feel that, oh, I'm getting glazy eyes. Time to ask, are we all on the same page?
Does everyone know what the clickers are that he's referring to? Okay, where everybody's versed in the clickers. Yes?
I was actually quite taken with his chapter on prediction, just because of the emotional connection then, that you're invested in the right answer so you remember even if you're wrong. But I teach history, and I'm really not good at creatively thinking of ways to use prediction for that, like who won the war? What do you think's gonna happen? Are we gonna have a constitution? I'm just not. So is it appropriate to ask about how to use that, or?
So how could you use prediction in a history class is your question?
That's my question.
Good.
And fortunately, there are some more experienced history faculty here, so I'm putting them on the spot.
Well, you could look at the American Revolution and paint the picture of what the British have going in and what the Americans have, and say, predict who wins this engagement, you know, out of 100 times. No, but just based on the knowledge of what you're...
Pretend you don't know how it comes
Right,
out.
or
Exactly.
what could have happened if we didn't
And then
have
you
the
can talk about
competition?
why didn't that happen?
Yeah.
They should have won 100 out of 100 times, and they lost. What happened to the British?
Yeah.
Or whatever.
Yeah.
But I think prediction is going to be more broad in that, like, if you gave your students your final on the first day of class, how well would they do?
Probably not very well, based on the final at the last.
Prediction's
You
not
know
just
who won,
about
right?
predict the future. Prediction's just about kind of acknowledging your lack of knowledge up front.
Yeah.
Because once we've explained something, it usually is often taught clearly enough that they think they've always known it.
Yeah.
But I think when you just take a multiple choice question and just have them answer it without any prior discussion, which seems so weird to them. They're saying, you're testing me before you've taught me anything.
Mhm.
But it forces them to acknowledge, and it actually activates their brain in a way that the brain says, actually, this is something I probably should know. And so then when the knowledge comes, there's like this pathway for it.
Right, right.
So maybe it was the word, use the word prediction, because you're thinking about predicting the future, but it's literally just trying to come up with an answer before you have any knowledge.
Good, okay, great.
Well, another way that he mentions is that what you're thinking about in some sense is what, from history, what's going to happen next when that's already known. But what's not known, maybe even by you, is what you're going to cover in the class, right? Now maybe if you distributed all these slides in advance, maybe that's less so. But you could even ask, what do you think will be the 3 main themes that we will discuss in this upcoming class, or that we're going to go over? And then you can refer back, and they can make some guesses, so that which helps them try to put some larger context in what they're reading, and trying to think like you would think, right? Trying to put these, whatever the preparation they've done for the class, figuring out a way to organize it and how you might organize it. And then when you go through those 3 themes, you point out, this is one of the 3 themes. How many people had this? How many people thought we were going to discuss this in the class? And so it's just predicting what you're going to do for the class.
That's actually a good way to, students always want a study guide, and I never want to make a study guide. But that's the way we do it in classes. Let's predict. You've been in the class for 6 weeks now. I'm going to write the midterm. I haven't written it. What would you put on the exam? What do you think ought to be on there? And that gets them thinking.
Yeah, that's good. Predict the midterm exam. Good. What other suggestions do we have for using prediction in like a history class or a class similar to that?
I mean, I thought about this because I had the same problem. I don't teach novels. And I went to, it is political science.
Yeah.
And one thought was that we use theory in most of our disciplines. Once students are introduced to a theory, ask them to make some empirical predictions that theory would lead them toward, knowing that you're going to go into the empirical material next and see how, first of all, how well they can link theory to point predictions, if that's appropriate. And secondly, get them thinking about what are their priors on this, because that's a great way to set up puzzles later on. We were led to expect A, we got B, what's going on here? And that's the way a lot of good papers start anyway, so.
Yeah, or good discussions, right. Good. And once one of the, to follow up on prediction, Lang says that we do need to do one thing when we ask for predictions. We eventually need to give the right answers, and we should give those right answers not a long time. It should be coming as quickly as possible. So we're expecting, and as was mentioned, it's okay to actually have the wrong prediction. And as a matter of fact, one of the things that's pointed out is that wrong predictions can actually learn to increase learning if you follow up with the correct learning, what was the correct prediction. All right.
And one strategy you can combine with prediction is pure instruction. And so a really powerful way is to do the iClicker, show the distribution of the answers, and then have them find someone in the class that has a different answer than them, and then teach each other, try to convince the other person you're right or acknowledge that you're wrong, and then I will do the iClicker question again, and we'll see if we converge to truth. And it's actually a neat experience to see whether or not you converge to truth, or whether false ideas sometimes can be more persuasive. But I think Jay's right. Then at the end, you definitely need to say, this is where we started, we got here, and now this is the truth.
Good. So in these first couple of chapters, where we've been talking about retrieval and prediction, were there any particular things that stood out to you that that impressed you, or that you thought, this is something that I could really use in my class? Yes.
One of the things that was meaningful to me is sometimes students think, why should I learn any content knowledge because I've got a phone and it has everything on it? Not really realizing that having that content-based knowledge helps them in the ways that they make decisions, how they interact with other people, how they view other cultures. I mean, there's lots of reasons why you need the content knowledge so that you can make good decision-based choices.
Good. Thank you. What other parts of those chapters impressed you? What questions did you have when you read those chapters? So one of the questions that I had, because the classes he seems to teach are a lot on British literature, and so a lot of his experiences come from that. And I kept on thinking to myself, how am I going to use this in my largest classes? Which of these things are going to work well for large classes, and which of these are going to work well for small seminars? So, which do you think are going to work well for large classes, some of these exercises? That will be helpful.
Clicker quizzes, that type of thing.
Say what?
So I teach large classes, and I came to this class thinking, how can I learn the opposite? So that's a great question.
This is small teaching.
Yeah, this is small class teaching. I thought, what is this teaching us about how not to do it? But I also try to teach a large class in a small way.
Mm-hmm.
And I try to invoke discussion, and I try to refer to what do you think the numbers would be for this, the likelihood of this crime, or I try to have them anticipate numbers, and that is a good way to predict where their knowledge base is, and then also to see what
Jay, I'll confess, I think in large classes that I'd be most jittery about, so a big GE class.
Yeah.
I asked an open question, where were we last time? One worry is that that can be a hard question, and I'm highly likely, I'm guessing, to get my overachievers doing the kind of Arnold Horshack thing a lot. And the second problem is, how do I keep this to 3 or 4 minutes? Because I don't want to blow up the opening of my class. And I'm bad at that. I'll just admit it. If I get me off on an interesting conversation, I'll go 15, 16, 17 minutes on a bad day. And look at my watch and say, oh, man, again? So I don't trust myself with some of these techniques.
Mm-hmm. So how can you keep the small teaching actually small?
Yeah. It'll become medium teaching.
Well, what kind of, many of you said that you had some experience with this. What are some of the ways that you can find to keep, in a large class, these opening questions or these other ideas to keep them shorter and more focused? Laura.
So I have different readings that different students read. So if I have 15 books, for example, that we're reading, they're not all going to read those. And then the ones that are assigned that book sit in the front few rows, and maybe I just ask the question.
Oh, that's a good idea.
And then everybody gets a chance to talk at different class periods, and you're not going to get the overachievers talking.
Good.
And so then the whole class is broken into 15 little groups, and then each group knows the day that they come and sit in the
So
front.
they sign up for that book or whatever.
They sign up for the book. Has anyone had success with online retrieval approaches with a big class, where you do the mini quizzes outside the class?
I do it. I don't know how successful it is. Like in my student evaluations, that is the thing the students hate the most. That's probably my because they feel like they're being quizzed on something before they learned it sufficiently.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Right, so they do it before class, but after they've done the reading,
Yeah.
and they hate it. So, I guess that's not what you were going for, but I tried, right?
So what are some of the things that you could do to make them hate it less, do you think? So, I mean, Lang gives some ideas, right, in terms of being, right, he gives some ideas, I think, for that. What are some ideas that we have, for other people have, for making them hate? Because I actually do the same thing. I do essentially pre-class quizzes that, if you've done the reading, are easy.
They're very low stakes.
Yeah.
Right? But it doesn't.
And my purpose is not, I have not set it up as a retrieval exercise. I set it up as, I'd like them to have actually read something before coming to class. But it might function as a retrieval exercise.
I haven't done this, so I just wonder, you said you set it up by saying I want you to have read. So to motivate that reading before class, this is what I'm going to do. I'm just wondering, Celeste, how you set it up. Because I'm thinking the way you talk explicitly with students about the assignments that you give them can facilitate their learning, but I don't know.
explain to them why we do it. I like this 5-minute spiel on the science, and it helps them learn, and it keeps them accountable. Because it's a big GE class. So it doesn't, I mean, it doesn't noticeably change the student evaluation.
Okay.
One thing I tell them about the pre-class quizzes, maybe this would help Celeste, is that students in the past have actually requested them, so they get some credit for having read their, and that's true, they have requested them, so.
One student, then you can say
Yeah.
others.
But it gives them credit for the reading that they've done, and they're usually quite easy if they've done the reading. I try not to make them too hard. So telling them, hey, this is giving you some credit for actually doing the work that you do. Maybe it reframes the way they're thinking about them. I don't know if that helps.
Well, I did that same idea, but then added to it, this class is going to be far more enjoyable for you if you and I share ideas back and forth than if I just sit here and spew at you. So if you come with some prior knowledge, we can chat back and forth with each other, and you don't just have to listen to me. And so come with some prior knowledge and come with the ability to add to our conversation rather than just be conversed to. And they like that. They like the fact that I want them to come and I want to hear what they have to say and why they have to say it.
Right.
They feel like they've been validated in some way, that they've got something valuable to add.
I thought Celeste's idea about explaining why in terms of the cognitive science. Have any of you had success in motivating students through transparency by saying, this, I know you're going to hate it, but this is what the research says, and this is going to help you learn in the long run? Because I remember Brock Kerwan talked about doing that in one of his teaching seminars that he did for us for the college a way back. And but I'm wondering if anyone else has had some success with that.
Well, I did have success with that, but in kind of smaller classes than a GE class. So in our undergraduate family theory course, I required students to study together in study groups before exams. And some students were excited about it, you know, the extroverted students, but the introverted students were nervous about it. And I told them I did it because I saw marked improvement on the exams that students took when students studied together in groups, and there's a large body of research about it.
Yeah.
And so then we talked together about things that we were nervous about with study groups, what we think the responsibility of a good study group member would be, and they did grade each other and submit a grade to me for the preparation and attendance in those study groups. And students regularly wrote in my evaluations, I was dreading study groups, I wasn't really sure this would work, but it worked really well.
Yeah.
I was so glad Dr. Holmes required it of us. So in that case, it seemed like a good strategy. I'm sorry that it's not being a good strategy in a larger classroom, you know, with a broader group of students.
Right, and that goes with what Lang calls in one of his chapters, I think, connects it with self-explaining, right, in terms of the more you have to explain to others what you're doing and why you're doing something, the more likely you are to remember it. And that might be, I mean, he doesn't really talk about too much, I remember, about group projects, right? He doesn't really talk about that. But that might be one of the mechanisms by which it works, because he didn't discuss that very much. Yes?
I've done over many, many years of teaching, over 30 plus years, breaking students into presentation groups. So in a 13-week class, I may have divided the class up, depending on the size, into at least 7 or 8 of those classes. The students are going to get together and put together a presentation on a chapter or on part of a book. And at the end of the semester, I always do what I call learning experience 2-page, single space learning experience. And inevitably, I always say the best thing we did during this semester is presentation groups, because then they have to get up and teach. Usually 3 or 4 students in a group, they have to get up and teach, and they do PowerPoint, and they bring in much more information than I could ever bring in. This is anthropology classes. They bring in much more information than I could ever retrieve and teach. And I just found it's extremely effective, and not only retrieval, but just getting students up there in front of a class, learning how to present ideas. And in the end, they always say, yeah, that was great. They're sort of leery about it at first, but they say, yeah, that was the greatest thing we did in the class.
So those are the ones that work out well, better than, say, the online quizzes, which are, yeah, I did that and I hated it. But it was probably good for me. You had a comment as well?
Oh, well, you asked the question about, being transparent and sharing some of the research. This is why we do this. And I did find as I was reading, it's like, I should tell the students this. This is why you need to know some of these facts. But one thing that I'm always very transparent about is why you shouldn't take notes on a computer. Sorry. All the research says you will learn more if you take notes by hand. And to a man, every student thinks they're the exception. I mean, they've come and told me that. I know that's what the research says, but I'm that 2% that does better if I type down every word you say, or I can multitask. I know the research says I can't multitask, but I'm the 1% that can. And I don't know how, to
Make them learn?
Make them believe.
That's the next book.
Some of these. So that kind of discouraged me. I thought, I'm not going to tell them, look, you need to learn this stuff because you need a bigger context to place all the facts in and everything. They don't even believe me that they can't multitask.
So how do they do on their tests?
Those students never do well, right?
Well, there's your proof.
But they do well enough, They
Maybe that's enough for them.
that's how they've operated their whole life. So why change now?
I think there's a difference between students that are multitasking and got Facebook and something else up while you're lecturing and they're trying to take notes. For someone with bilateral carpal tunnel, I get a lot more done here than I do there. But I will agree, nothing beats flashcards when it comes to studying for, specific things, which doesn't really count so much in the course that I teach, but I try to, you just get up there and you do your thing and it comes out. Now, I haven't really gauged who's taking notes on the computer and how they're doing in class. I should go back and look at my grades last semester. See that.
Well,
but,
it's more, they don't believe, when I
Yeah.
try to help them, I say, this is why I'm doing this. Because the research shows if you do this, if you take these stupid little 2-answer quizzes, you'll remember better. So I have tried that and they don't believe me. I don't know. Maybe I need to wear a suit.
A white the white lab coat, yes, with your name here. That might do it.
Well, so what was your thought then about the way they wrote the book, where they'd say, okay, this is the theory, and then they'd actually cite and describe scientific studies?
I believe it.
Yeah. What I mean is, the books I've read in the past were always just talking about the practice,
Yeah.
as opposed to putting them next to each other.
Yeah.
And so I wonder if we as professors could describe some of these studies. Like in this one, it was about mixing problems. There was one that struck me about baseball players in mass practice versus
Yeah.
interweaving,
Yeah.
and that study resonated with me, and actually it's going to change the way I teach, because I didn't. And then the numbers just are really striking. So like with the interweaving, they learn more in the moment if you don't interweave.
Right.
But then when you go and look at them several weeks later, it's like they've learned 3 times as much if you interweave. And so I think.
Yeah, I'm changing my syllabus based on that.
Yeah, so I guess as a teacher, I'm trying to figure out why is it that I didn't ever know that. And so I guess this book really changed me quite a bit, and so that's why we want to have this discussion, like in ways that you've been changed by it as well. But for me, the combination of theory with practice was very powerful.
Do you want to make
I don't know if the time has passed, but to me, it seems like a lot of these questions these issues that are being raised go to the question of to what degree is it essential that the students be happy with what we're teaching them?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I don't know, in Celeste's case, they may hate it, but maybe they're learning better, right? I don't know if you didn't do it before that way.
No, I would assume so.
Because, there are certain things that are just unpleasant, right? There are certain things we ask students to do that they're not going to enjoy. And maybe this is really old school thinking.
Yeah.
Driven by the consumer, what's going to make them, what they're going to find most engaging. But, there are certain classes, method classes that we teach, which I just tell them at the outset, you're probably not going to like this class a lot. This is not why you signed up to be a history major. I'm going to make you do things that you won't enjoy. But somewhere down the road, maybe in years, you may realize that there was some value in this unpleasant process.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that kind of class as well. Yeah. So we could think a little bit more about, since you started talking about interweaving, but what in this book, more generally, that Joe is bringing up is going to change the way that you teach, or what are you going to try to bring in to your class, having read some of these things here? What are the things that impressed you?
Well, I would be interested in hearing other people's ideas about interweaving. So anyone who has done something like this, because that stuck out to me too. But I was trying to think about how I might introduce one topic and then bring students back to another in some kind of problem-solving exercise, or do some other more integrative problem-solving exercise more regularly. I feel like I have a few examples of that I do maybe once or twice in the semester, and I see they go really well, but trying to expand. So that's a more active part of our learning environment. I just wonder if anyone does that well.
And one
they
reason
can
they
share
might
it.
do so well is you do it periodically. You don't do it all the time.
Mhm.
You just said it's now and then.
I actually think that the methods classes are actually easier to do with that than some other classes that I've taught. So I teach the despised methods class in our department, which people hate at the time, hate later, but then occasionally write grudging emails. Oh, it turns out these things you made me do, they were useful for me to get a job and to succeed at the job. But you can go back, so I actually do go back and hit some of the things that we discussed earlier that were relatively simple models, but go back and show how they're related to the past, to the other ones. And so this is why, I mean, to me, the chapter on interweaving and connecting are actually, they seem to go better to me together than the way he structured it, because I see a strong connection between those two chapters, connecting what you're doing later with what's come before. And the place that I can actually bring in experience is that I play the piano and the organ, and so I have a lot of experience with massed practice versus distributed practice. And I can tell you from experience, distributed practice always works better. And so I can share that experience on the piano and organ with others, right? And I actually teach workshops on how to practice effectively, but that really works well in terms of saying, here's how you can practice statistics effectively. This is, so when you do an assignment, and I actually try to encourage not only in the way that we cover it in the class, I try to encourage students how they pursue their problem sets. So I usually have like four problems on the problem sets. It's set up into 4 parts, each weekly assignment. And I tell them, don't try to do all, maybe try to do all 4 at once, start on each 4, but then work on one, and if you don't finish it, it's okay. Then the next day, go to the next one, but then come back to the one that you did before. And then on the next day, go to problem 3 and come back to 2 and 1, and just letting it sit in your subconscious and letting it work on it, you'll come back to it and say, oh, why didn't I understand this before? Or maybe doing something in problem 3 helped me do problem 2 and problem 1 coming back, even though I've tried to set it up so it goes from easier to harder problems, that they kind of build on each other. So I try to teach the students the interweaving within their own assignments, and then try to do the same thing in the context of the class. Now we're going to go back, even though we've already done regression, now we're going to go back to a difference of means test, which is really a simple thing. Why are we doing that? That's at least how I've done it in that class.
I think there are 2 things, because I've thought a lot about the interweaving. That's the one that affected me the most. So here's an easy one I'm going to do, is in each class I'm going to just bring up questions from previous classes.
Yeah,
But
I
just
just
take like a
thought that
final
too. I was
exam
thinking
question.
about that. Yeah.
But here's the really mean one that the students would hate, but it would make them learn so much, is you make every assessment cumulative. So
Right.
because
Well,
they want us to
actually
split our
do
quizzes
that,
into
yeah.
like compartmentalize. I mean, so at the very least we should always have cumulative finals, but it means that actually like midterm 2 probably should have questions from midterm 1 questions, and all the quizzes should, I mean, that's what interweaving is really about, is letting all the pieces float around.
Yeah, I like that.
But I think students would hate it. I mean, that's
Well,
Eric's
so I
point.
actually do that.
Yeah.
But I do that in my gender course, so all of the exams are essay exams. And so I think just the nature of essay exams and the kind of critical thinking that we do with those essay exams facilitates this kind of interweaving approach. So we do revisit questions on each exam, but I think I can do more of that throughout the context of the course as well. So that's great.
That was actually one of the takeaways I took, because I usually sort of tell students, no, it's not going to be cumulative. In the big GE courses, right, you just need to know this piece, and that piece. But I realized in reading this that in some ways that's really discouraging them from doing some of this higher learning, or just learning and then discarding and moving on. And so if there are ways, to sort of link together or connect probably thematically in a big GE history sort of lecture course, where I'm not asking a specific question about the Roman Empire, but maybe plague or disease or environmental sort of impacts, in the 3 different time periods that we've studied. That I think that that probably promotes more effective kind of engagement and learning in the class.
And in addition to the interweaving, you made a point about making these connections both in practice but also in relevancy. Well, they may say, why are we studying about the gold rush? Said, well, let's see some comparisons today and see how fracking relates to the same kinds of environmental questions that we've just looked at in the gold rush. So then they're like, oh, yeah, I've heard about that. So then we can talk about the access pipelines and these other kinds of things, so that they're saying there's a modern application for learning about this content knowledge.
Yeah.
I think interweaving is very important. I try to do that as much as I can, but sometimes you think you're not doing it enough, but students always have a different point of view. At the end of the semester, they may say, oh, he just repeated himself the whole semester. So you have to be careful about not interweaving too much. They always have the final say, don't they?
One thing that I didn't realize I was interleaving, but I guess I was. But, I have 4 different sections of my upper division course, and I try to pick, I only use research articles because there's no book. So then I try to pick research articles that integrate that first section into the new one I'm teaching. So if I'm teaching on moral emotions, then I'll pick an article that has moral cognition and moral emotion. So then they revisit those constructs. It doesn't work if you don't have the right articles, but if you can find articles that bring in an earlier concept and look at the two together, it helps the students to synthesize and then revisit that initial topic.
What are some other things that you're planning to change in your teaching that struck you as you read through this book that you thought you might integrate into your own teaching?
Less is more.
Explain a little bit more about that.
Sometimes we have such a desire to cover so many things. It'd be better just to focus in on a few points to help them acquire the cognitive skills to process that information.
But then how do you choose what's the best of the West? I mean, what's your criteria that you say, okay, this is more important than this, or they can do this outside of class, I need to do this in class? How do you do that?
Bruce, I think for me, I do it by trial and error, right? What seems to be working. I don't know. Maybe that's too simple of an answer.
I don't know that there is an easy way to do it. Probably trial and error is the only way you can do it, but classes change from year to year.
Right.
So, I mean, I agree with you. When I taught over in the merit school, that was a hard thing to do, was say, okay, I've got this big group, how do I focus on what they need? And still give them some history. So I taught some ISIS classes. How do you take the history so they can understand the current? But if I left that out, I could spend more time on the current.
I'm intrigued by the ISIS
Yeah.
classes. I'm hoping it's not the ISIS that I'm.
No. In fact, they changed the name to IS instead of ISIS.
One of the things I'm going to change is I like the sort of the prelude music kind of notion, coming a little bit early. My problem is I rush into class at the last minute and gathering my thoughts, and I think if I had a pre-game kind of script a little bit, like I'm just reminding myself, I want to do a predictive thing or something else, rather than just sort of where were we last time and picking up and starting spewing out. So sort of just being a little better prepared and showing up 5 minutes early, talking to students, having a game plan.
Right, and one of the things, and I'm guilty of that as well, as showing up just before class, okay, we're ready to go. But one of the things that he mentions is helpful is if you become, you get to and talk to the students ahead of time and make it a more familiar environment, which actually works really well with what was mentioned today in terms of inspiring learning, in terms of getting to know your students and letting your students get to know you, and they'll be more motivated to learn if they've had that. In the back, I'm sorry, you had a comment?
Referring to your question, I think each discipline has its core knowledge body and skill set. And by experience, professors can gradually determine what kind of knowledge body is most important and what kind of skill sets is most important, and make adjustment towards the skill body and the dynamics.
So one that affected me was whatever cognitive skills you're seeking to instill in your students and that you'll be assessing for a grade, the students should have time to practice in class. So I was just curious does anyone have any ideas of how to implement that idea, that there's a task we want them to be able to do on the final, that trade-off between instructing versus letting them practice during class. I was curious how people approach that.
But isn't that homework?
That's why this kind of struck me, is because I always thought homework is that thing you do out, but they say that learning actually involves practicing, and so they should be practicing with us as their coach, their present.
Yeah, you wanted to say
Well,
something?
the corollary to that is, he says to blow up your assessments and really think about, like, I give them all rubrics for their writing and stuff, but I think you maybe simplify that. Instead of, 10 items, maybe make it 4 or 5 and work on those 4 or 5 things is what I'm thinking about for changing the class. One thing that Joyce helped me do last couple of years ago was to break writing into small assignments. So rather than write an essay paper that has an argument and evidence, just have them do one assignment that is, just give me an argument statement, and then just give me some evidence, and then, break those in and discuss those in class. And I found that the papers they wrote at the end were much better. So I really like that, but I think I'm gonna do what he said, which is blow up your assessments a little bit. Really think about it. Don't just copy what you got from University of North Carolina Writing Center or whatever, right?
I think there are some things that you do have to do outside of class. So I'm just thinking about, again, my statistics class, which is a big class, and it's, I'm trying to figure out ways to improve it. And one of the things I want students to be able to do is, here's a research question, here's a data set, answer the research question. Now, we can't do that whole step in class. That's what the homework is for, right? So they can go through that. But there are parts that we do practice in class. The part that we practice in class is, I'll throw up a past test question or a past question that looks just like that and say, what are the first steps to addressing this? What are the tools that are available to us? How do we know which tool we should use in this case? And I can do that part with the students in class. The going and actually cleaning the data, running a regression model, presenting the results, that's the homework. I don't know how to do that except in class, and show examples of that after class, right, in class. The other thing that I try to do that we can do in class is I want them to be able to assess other scholarship. So that we actually have that on the final exam consists of kind of this take-home part, which is, like I mentioned before, here's a research question, here's a data set, go. And here's your client, and go. And the other part is, here's this regression table, interpret it for us. And we can actually do that in class, right? And that's part of, we do that in the testing center at the end of the semester. Here's this thing that I want you to be able to understand and assess that other people might bring up. But we can actually take 10 minutes in class and do an example problem of that, where I'll say, here's this table, answer the following 2 questions about it.
So I regularly tell students, turn to your neighbor. Like, I'll ask a question in class, instead of me interpreting something for the students, I'll say, how do you think this is interpreted? Discuss this with your neighbor for 20 seconds.
Yeah.
But that's a quick way for them to actually be engaging, and then maybe the neighbor corrects them, or they correct the neighbor, and it seems to be better than me just spoon feeding, here's the interpretation, or here's the answer. Give them a short opportunity throughout class.
Wade?
I want to come back to this comment about writing and how to do writing assignments, because it seems to me, if this book is correct and it influences the way that I teach, it could also influence the way that students make an argument, which is to say, we're all trying to help them write better, and we're all more or less aware of how catastrophic a lot of undergraduate writing is. So we all have our own pet theories about how this can be fixed. And Joyce does too, and whatever, but the issue is, can my students, probably not an intro level, but can a junior, senior level student start to think about how human beings learn things as part of their professionalization, as part of thinking about, this is why I can't hose them down with words, why I have to structure things by claims, reasons, and evidence, and why the professional community that I will join relatively soon is going to expect me to be able to do these things. So, I would love to be able to obviously learn how to do some of these things better, but I'd also like to be able to incorporate a few of these. Maybe this is Joe's research stuff. I mean, helping students see, senior students see 3 or 4 of these studies as meaningful for the way they construct arguments. That could be really fruitful for the top 40, 50% of the class.
So we just have a minute left. Does anyone want to make any final observations? Because what we're hoping is that you'll take a few of these ideas and try them out just next semester. And if you haven't read the book yet, I mean, I bet everyone's going to be able to find 3 things they can try out. And the other book we were debating about was Make It Stick. They're very similar to each other, but
You refers to it so much, I thought, why don't I just read it?
yeah, so, and they both do that. So yeah. So does anyone want to share any final comments?